This is Robin Corak. Thank you for joining us at MoonCon today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Demeter and healing the mother wound. And just to give you an idea of who I am an author for Moon Books' Pagan Portals series. My first book was Persephone, Practicing the Art of Personal Power. That one came out in 2020. And then I'm excited to let you know that I have a book entitled Demeter coming out in October. It is available now on Amazon and Moon Books and other places. So let's talk a little bit about who Demeter was. And it's interesting because the author Manuela Dunn Mascotti says that the mother archetype of all the archetypes was the first deity possessing human characteristics created by mankind, and that this archetype has a powerful impact on the collective unconscious. And what I love about Demeter and many of the Greek gods and goddesses is that she is complex. Even though we often hear only about the mothering side of her, she is very multifaceted and she has flaws and she learns through hardships and makes mistakes like humans do. So she is not perfect by any means. She is most well known for the hymn to Demeter, which Homer wrote, but there's also an Orphic version. And it's the story, of course, of Persephone. Persephone is her daughter. And she really is protective of her daughter. And as her daughter's on the brink of womanhood, she's out picking flowers with these nymphs, and Demeter's off somewhere else. And depending on which version of the story you read, either Hades comes out of the ground and kidnaps her and takes her to the underworld, or Hades comes out of the ground. I always like to imagine him looking like Jason Momoa, and she goes with him willingly. But in either way, Demeter, of course, finds out that her daughter is gone. And this, as it would any mother, sends her into a tailspin. And she begins walking around trying to figure out what happened. And the goddess Hecate comes to her and says, I heard something. I don't know exactly who took her, but agrees to walk with Demeter to try and find more information. And they come across, I believe it was Helios, who told Demeter, oh yeah, Hades took her, but it's fine. He's going to make her his wife, and he's great. He'll be a great husband. And as you can imagine, this only enrages Demeter even more. And so she actually goes into a deep depression. And she does so to the extent that the crops, nothing grows on earth anymore. Because as we know, she's also a goddess of fertility in the sense of agriculture and land and that type of thing. And she wanders around and she actually disguises herself as a crone. And comes across these young women who take her home. And it just so happens that their father is the king of Eleusis. And so she acts as a nursemaid, a caretaker for the king's son, Demeter. And just like she did with Persephone to a certain extent, she doesn't think about what Demeter's mother wants. She decides she's going to make him more immortal. And so every night when everyone else is asleep, she puts him into the fire, a part of this process to make him immortal. And one evening, Demeter's mother, Metanera, comes out and sees her and, of course, screams. And Demeter gets mad and says, I will not make your son immortal now. But ultimately, as we know, Persephone comes back to spend part of the year on Earth or in Olympus with her mother and part of the year in the underworld. And one of the things that she is most well known for, too, is that she gave the ancient Greeks the Eleusinian mysteries, one of the most well-known mystery initiation types of rituals to exist. But what most people don't know about Demeter, she also was seen as a contributor to the social order, somebody who would make laws and involved with justice. And she's also associated with the creatures known as the Arañas, who were these female creatures that would take vengeance upon people that had committed crimes, particularly crimes against women, matricide, rape, those types of things. So as you can see, Demeter is much more complex than we might initially think from just reading the myth about her and Persephone. So what is the mother wound, and why do we want to heal it? The mother wound, this term has been talked about more and more. And it really relates to the impact of our parents, especially between the ages of 3 and 7, because that is when we establish our worldviews that impact later growth and perceptions. And it's not to say, none of this is to say that if you have a mother wound, that your mother was a bad person or a bad mother. Sometimes, nobody gives us a manual when we become parents that says, here's how you deal with this child. Here's how you deal with this child. A lot of times, we're kind of struggling the best that we can. And some have more resources than others. But it's typically, the mother wound is typically defined as a loss or a lack of mothering, particularly in your early years. This could include abuse. It could include neglect. It could be that we didn't receive the love and attention that we needed as children. Sometimes with the mother wound, the mother was maybe distant and less attuned to the child's emotional needs. So the child was kind of left without the nourishment, emotional nourishment that they perhaps needed to grow, to feel safe, to feel secure. I actually, in my personal opinion, expand the healing or the mother wound definition to include the opposite side of the spectrum as well. Mothers who perhaps with the best of intentions are very overbearing, which if you look at the story of Demeter, you can see in the beginning, she definitely comes across that way. Persephone has had two offers for marriage. Apollo and Hermes, I believe, were the two. And her mother turns down both of those offers without ever consulting with her. So I think there's something to be said about the other side of the spectrum too, when you have a mother who can be very overbearing or domineering. Again, it can be for the best of reasons. It's hard for this type of mother to let go, but by not letting go, it can eclipse the child's own self, unique self and independence. So there's a wide spectrum here when we talk about the mother wound, at least in my own definition. And the impacts are huge. They're often, actually, we don't even recognize when we have impacts from healing the mother wound. Or trying to heal the mother wound. As Alice Miller Downing said, each of us can only be empathetic to the extent that we recognized and have healed our own childhood wounds. And Jean Shinoda Bolen, which great author, and I highly recommend her books if you're interested in this. On the other side of that, she says, if an archetype, and in this case, the mother archetype, is in balance in us, we can enact the highest, most positive qualities of ourself and the goddesses we resonate with. And it's really crucial for self-healing and self-love to really address this issue of the mother wound. If we have a mother wound that is not addressed or recognized, it can greatly reduce our feelings of self-worth. And one example of this is imposter syndrome. And that's not to say that if you have imposter syndrome that it's related, it has to be related to a mother wound, because a lot of us, particularly women, do have that imposter syndrome that pops up. But it is to say that if you have a mother wound, this can be an impact or an effect of that. Feeling like you're never worthy enough. Feeling like, particularly as a child, if you had to constantly prove or felt like you had to constantly prove your worth and your value, that's something that can continue to manifest in adulthood. The other thing that can happen is codependency. So it can be easy sometimes for someone to develop their sole identity as a mother or a caretaker. And Demeter experiences this when Persephone is gone and she falls into a deep depression. Demeter does. She takes on the guise of someone who is past childbearing age. And she's questioning her own identity because for so long, her identity has been tied to her daughter. And I think sometimes I've seen this happen too, where if as a child, we had a mother who perhaps was distant, didn't provide the nourishment that we needed, we can easily, out of an intent to not do that to our children, we can easily go in a different direction and self-identify as a mother primarily or solely. What can also happen if we don't heal the mother wound is we can unconsciously inflict our wounds on others, and unintentionally. It can impact, of course, our relationships, how we are as a parent, how we are in intimate relationships. And oftentimes too, and this is true with trauma in general, but we will find outdated coping mechanisms that helped us to survive as a child. We continue to utilize those if we're not aware of this as an adult. And oftentimes those mechanisms that may have saved us or helped us as a child do not work when we are an adult. And so they interfere with relationships, with happiness, in general. And just to give you an example, a friend of mine who definitely struggled with the mother wound and other trauma, his coping mechanism was to pretend like everything was okay, but also to do what I call the turtle effect, to go pull his legs in, pull everything inside, and just go silent. And that was his way of surviving as a child. But what happened as an adult is when he would have relationships, be they friendships or intimate relationships, when something would happen that was scary or frustrating or difficult to deal with, he would pretend like nothing was wrong, and he would pull inside, and he would basically stop communication entirely with no explanation to the people around him, the people that cared about him. The other thing that happens sometimes too is that this is what I call the chameleon effect. So if you are experiencing the mother wound, it could be that as a child you tried to pick up on what would get you the attention that you needed, what would make your mother happy. And as an adult, sometimes that morphs into this chameleon effect where you're constantly changing yourself. And I've seen people do that too, where they had this issue as a child, and then when they grew up, they constantly changed their personality, their interests, their hobbies, everything to match the person that they liked or the person that they were in a relationship with, or whether it was friendship or intimate. And so, and never really knowing who they were, because they were always changing to be this person that they thought someone else wanted them to be. So those are some of the impacts. So how do you know if you have this mother wound? Sometimes you'll know. If you've had a lot of trauma as a child, you might suspect already or know how it's impacting you, but not always. So according to Psychology Today, signs can include feeling a lack of approval or acceptance, feelings of not being loved or not being loved much as much as a sibling. So maybe you had a brother or sister that was the favorite, and you were constantly vying to be as good as they were, to be seen as good as they were, as valued as they were. You may have uncertainty about yourself and or the mother-child relationship. You may have difficulty relating emotionally to mothers or mother figures. You may have a need to constantly be better and attain perfection. And so, trying to be better is always a good thing, right? But if it's to the point where you're never feeling worthy of love and you're constantly trying to be perfect, as an attempt, and sometimes what this plays out as subconsciously as an attempt to gain the mother's approval and love. Or a role reversal in which the child feels the need to be the mother in a sense and protect or care for the mother. That happens quite a bit, unfortunately, when you may have a mother who had some chemical dependency issues or had some mental health issues. Oftentimes you'll find that the child doesn't really get to be a child. The child takes on the responsibility of the adult and does things to take care of and manage the mother that is struggling. And so, as I said, it's not uncommon for it to be present with children who have lived with mothers who are prone to mental health and or chemical dependency. And again, this is not to say that those mothers were bad. It is not about judgment. It's recognizing what happened so that you can heal this part of yourself. And sometimes it's very obvious when these signs manifest, and sometimes we carry them around without ever knowing, because I do think there was a spectrum of mother wounding that occurs, right? Sometimes it is very extreme. If you've had a situation where your mother was neglectful, abusive, but sometimes it's not so obvious, and can happen with the best of intentions. I can tell you, for me, as a child, having a rare medical condition, being very ill, very fragile, and parents out of the best of intentions wanting to protect me, wanting to make sure I was okay, and not realizing for a long time that impacted my ability to be independent. And so I remember a point in time where my parents finally realized they can't keep enabling me because I'll never be able to stand on my own 2 feet. And they started making me do things for myself. And I was quite angry with that. But ultimately that needed to happen in order for me to not carry around this wound of feeling like I wasn't capable or I wasn't strong. Women who resonate strongly with Demeter or the mother archetype in general may have a strong need to mother as a parent, but can also include being a caregiver or nourishing through bringing a project or a cause or piece of art to life. So when we talk about mothering, certainly we are encompassing the actual definition of mothering, right? Parenting a child, whether through pregnancy, whether through adoption. But that mothering energy can also play out in different ways. And, it's the same type of energy that we use when we have a project that is our baby, or we have a piece of art that we are intimately connected with, that we are creating, whether that's writing, whether it's dance, whether it's visual art. So there are a lot of ways that this mothering energy can come to life. And when it's in balance, it provides an environment for growth and achieving potential. It's like the most fertile, amazing soil that you can imagine. And just incredible things happen. Things come to life. Things, you help people strive even closer to achieving their higher self. But when it's out of balance, when this mother archetype within us is out of balance, it can result in our being critical. It can result in our being withholding of our affection, or even just withholding of ourselves in general, being very guarded. The other thing that can happen, and I see this a lot, is it can be hard to say no or to set boundaries. That is a real challenge, I think, in general for women. It can result in our being demanding. It can also result in our being a martyr. I've had situations where I've had friends whose mother, didn't agree with them, and the response was, well, I guess I'm just a horrible mother. Or they go bend over backwards to try so hard to be there, and it ends up backfiring, and they end up in this martyr position. The other thing I would say is that, and I think this happens unfortunately a lot in our society, and I think that recent developments, particularly in America, have unfortunately reinforced this, is that it's really not uncommon when a woman becomes a mother, for that suddenly to be, in the eyes of other people, her sole identity. And it's interesting because that doesn't necessarily happen with fathers, although fathers can have their own situations, own challenges. But we tend to look at mothers as being existing for the sole purpose of their children. And that can be really tricky because it can, if you're not careful, overshadow or feel like it's erasing who you are as an individual. We are mothers, certainly, and that is a big part of our identity, but that is not our sole identity. And I think that's why it's important to look at Demeter's myths, because if you really look into her myths, she's known as being a mother goddess, but that's not all she is. She is very multifaceted, and she is known to, as I said, to provide order, and she is known to give the world these Eleusinian mysteries, which deal with as much with spiritual birth, death, and rebirth as they do with anything else. And she is known in some stories to really have some rage in her and to strike people down when they offend her. She's very multifaceted, and we need to be careful that we are able to protect, as part of healing the mother wound, protect that part of ourselves that is strictly us. We need to have something that is strictly us or for us. So particularly for people who relate strongly to the Demeter archetype or to the mother archetype, there are a couple different transitions that are really powerful and that really impact us. One is the transition to being a crone, being no longer able to have children biologically. That is can be a really challenging transition for those of us who are very resonant with Demeter, are very resonant with the mother archetype. And the other one is when our grown children leave the house. Menopause and empty nest syndrome are two of the really keystones of challenges for women who are dealing with their mother wound from a standpoint of that being their only identity or that being their primary identity. And as Jean Shinoda Bolden says, it can lead to depression. It can lead to feeling lost and stuck. But on the positive side, depending on how that transition is handled, it can also lead to a redefining of oneself and embracing of personal power. And in the midst of Great Depression, if you look at Demeter and her myths, she still managed to give one of the biggest gifts to ancient Greek religion, and that's the Eleusinian mysteries. So if we can work through the darkness of our mother wound, we can become very effective leaders, very powerful leaders and contributors. So how do we work with Demeter on healing this wound? Well, there are many different ways to do this. Demeter, first of all, and one of her gifts is she's a very nurturing archetype. She can assist us with creating a safe space in which to heal. And we can access her unconditional mother's love so we can learn to love and validate ourselves. She can give us the love that we may not have received as a child. And she also teaches us to set loving boundaries. And if you think about it, her daughter does this as well. You know, her daughter was faced with options. Demeter's option for her was, you come back to Earth and Olympus and you stay with me, forget about Hades. And of course, Hades would prefer for her to stay in the underworld the entire year. And Zeus, who is the moderator of this whole, dilemma, said, well, you ate the pomegranate seeds, so you're going to have to stay in the underworld. And Persephone was able to speak up for herself and set boundaries by saying, you know what? I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm going to find a third way. I am going to be on Earth and Olympus with my mother part of the year and in the underworld part of the year. So she was able to speak up for herself and set some boundaries for herself. Demeter teaches us how to mother ourselves, and that is so important, particularly if we did not get that mothering and that love that we needed as a child. And she teaches us the importance of mothering ourselves lovingly and fiercely and advocating for ourselves. And she teaches us that through her lessons, through the things that she's learned, that we must intentionally envision who we are, aside from what our mothers may have expected of us, aside from what other people think. Who are we? Who do we want to be, and what do we want in our life? We need to build a strong center that will not sway as we are, buffeted by the winds of society and the challenges that come up in our life. She helps us to access the mother within. And while mothering our children is such an important role for those of us that have children, mothering ourselves is equally important and actually makes us in some ways better parents, whether that's parenting a child or whether it's, like I said, parenting a project, birthing something into life. We need to find that mother within, and we need to be able to provide ourselves with that which we may have missed as a child. She teaches us to intentionally envision our future, to get to know ourselves and our voice, and to build a center from that. And really asks us the question, how can we live from a place of authenticity? What does that look like for us? If we did not have to worry about what anyone else thought, what would we be? Who would we be as our best selves? She gives us permission to grieve losses. And this is so, so important because, and not just death is definitely a huge one, but loss of relationships, loss of jobs, loss of the vision of our future, loss of the relationship that we thought we should have had with our mother, right? Our own losses that we may have contributed to in some way, shape, or form. We need to grieve those. And what's really interesting to me is that in our society, when we do have coming of age rituals for women, for young women, but we don't really, for the most part, seem to have a ritual that recognizes when our children are independent and ready to step on their own, which recognizes the mothering that occurred, but also recognizes this child as an adult in their own right, kind of a separation ritual, cutting of the cords. Not so much cutting of the cords in the sense that we'll never talk again, but cutting of the cords in the sense of you have your own identity now, and I respect that. And and the child respecting the energy that the mother put into helping them grow. But it's really necessary, I think, to acknowledge and grieve our losses, because if we don't, they manifest in other ways. And certainly that applies to the losses that we had as a child because of the mother wound, whether that's the loss of our parents' love, whether it's the loss of our childhood because we had to take care of our mother, whether it's the loss of that independence, that ability to do things on our own the way we would want to do them. There is a meditation in my book coming out in October that deals specifically with grief and grieving these losses. And I found Demeter to be a great ally when it comes to grief, and she's really working with her has really helped me to get through some significant losses in my life. So what are some things that we can do to work with Demeter to help us to heal the mother wound? One of the things that's also in the book is a formal ritual for mother-daughter separation. And again, this does not mean separation forever, but it could, if you do not have a relationship with your mother, it could be a loving separation there. And it can be done by the mother and daughter together, or it can be done by only one. So if you had some trauma in your childhood and you don't have a relationship with your mother, or your mother's no longer here, you can still do this ritual on your own. But it really focuses on acknowledging and appreciating the mothering wisdom and lessons that were given, unless they were traumatic, and equally acknowledging that the mother is her own being, as is her daughter now that she has come of age, or her child now that she has come of age, an adult in their own right. So that ritual is in the book. The second thing that is an altar to Demeter. And this altar, there's a lot of suggestions in my book, but this altar can be pretty simple. It can be a candle. I like to keep a sheaf of wheat on my altar for her, or some sort of fruit or something that represents the fertility of the land. And that's the other thing I do want to mention, is that when Demeter was wandering and she was so depressed and she stopped the crops from growing on the earth, at some point this came to Zeus's attention, and he realized that if the crops stop growing, the humans are going to die. And if the humans die, there's no one to worship him and the other gods. And so he decided, well, we really need to do something about this. And so he sent gods and goddesses to offer gifts to Demeter to cajole her. And she stood firm. Talk about boundaries. She stood firm and said, I am not going to allow anything to grow until I am reunited with my daughter. And talk about boundaries and advocating for herself. She's not necessarily seen as one of the most powerful of gods or goddesses when you look traditionally at how the gods and goddesses are viewed, but she truly is very powerful. She brought all of those gods and goddesses to their knees and refused to give in until they acknowledged her pain and they acknowledged her request to be reunited with her daughter. So that's another strength to draw on. That I'll usually keep, like I said, fruit, some sort of produce plant, sheaf of wheat. There's many things that you can have on your altar that relate to her, and just spending time. It's like developing a relationship with anyone else or any other deity, right? Just spending some time sitting down for a few minutes in the morning or the evening, just listening and sharing with her. I have found that to be particularly helpful. I find, the loving energy that emanates from her when I go to her and ask for that mothering. It's incredible, the feeling that I get. So definitely developing a relationship with her, and self-care, which I know we hear a lot of talk about these days, but really what I mean by that is what makes you feel good. And it can be something big, but it can also be something very small. For me, a bath. If I can find like 10 minutes to myself, or well, actually more than 10 minutes, if I can find 20 or 30 minutes to myself to just relax in a bath, that is healing and nourishing for me. So what makes you feel good, and how can you provide that to yourself? What type of touch makes you feel calm, or makes you feel or energized, loved? What is it? What foods make you feel that way? Are there certain smells? For me, incense always gets my mind in a mode of listening and stillness, and kind of calms the monkey mind that I often get. What activities, what did you love to do as a child? Especially if you never got to have much of a childhood, what are some simple things you can do? I will tell you, for me, what I've found over the past couple of years is that paint by numbers is my guilty pleasure. And I don't think I'm particularly good at it, but it's something I love to do as a child. And it's very meditative for me. It's just puts my mind at ease, and it's creative and fun. Or playing on a playground, as silly as that may sound. What are the things you love to do as a child? Do that. What calms you? All right. What feeds you? What feeds your soul? One of the things, I love games. And so one of the things I started doing was playing a self-care game with marbles. So you get those little, like at the dollar store, those little clear glass marbles that you put in plants and things like that. I bought a bag of those for $1, and I have a little jar. And every time I do something loving towards myself, or something that can be considered self-care, I put a marble in the jar. And it's, for me, it's kind of a competition to see how quickly can I fill up that jar. But it's all in giving to ourselves. So that's another example that's worked for me. Also, some of these self-care apps they have now are amazing. I have one called Finch. There's many out there, but it's this little creature. And the more you do for yourself, whether it's you set goals like drinking water or moving for 5 minutes a day, the more you do, the more this creature grows. So for those of us who are, again, game oriented or visually oriented, that one I think has been helpful. But I think, it's the trickiest, I think, sometimes when you have young children to find that time for yourself, but it's also the most important. It's kind of like the oxygen mask, right? You have to be able to give to yourself before you can fully and effectively give to other people. The other thing you can do, and this is from The Artist's Way, which is the revised version, which I highly recommend. They ask you to take yourself on a date, right? To get to know yourself, to just spend time with yourself. And it's simple things. It's going to a thrift store and just looking around, or going on a walk and looking for particular rocks or shells, or, one of them I think they suggest is going to the dollar store. But just taking yourself on a date, spending time with yourself. It sounds really corny. I was a little hesitant to try that, but I've done it. And it's actually, there's something actually very nourishing about it. Spending time in nature with the mother. And that's a whole other topic for another workshop, but I just want to say that the mother wound does not only apply to us as individuals. I really see that the mother wound applies to the mother as the earth in a different way, of course. But spend time in nature, and you'll find, oftentimes you'll find yourself restored. One of my friends always says this, and I love it: stop shitting on yourself, right? You should do this, you should do that, I should have done this. It's okay if you miss certain things. It's okay I have a lot of guilt from being sick as a child a lot when I take time to rest, and I really had to work on that. But you know what? It's okay if on a Saturday I decide to sleep in or just chill all day and watch Netflix or play games. It's okay if that's what your body needs. Starting to set loving boundaries. This is really, really difficult, particularly if you had to be the peacemaker as a child. So start simple. For example, you might say, I'm not going to take any calls after 9 p.m. I'm going to shut off my phone because I really don't want to talk to anybody after that time. I want to sleep. Or say no to an event you really don't want to do. Or do 10 minutes of yoga or meditation. Start your day later if you can. Schedule time to rest. Agree to disagree. Sometimes, you have to just agree to disagree. Don't answer the phone if it's someone toxic. This is a hard one sometimes, because sometimes it's somebody that we really like or love. But if you know that person is going to be draining, wait to call them back until you're in a better space. You don't have to answer the phone every time. Put your out of office on your email if you need a break from emails. If somebody asks you for money, that's always a hard one. It's, I have other commitments that prevent me from doing that, but I'll share other resources with you. Or have you considered trying this? Or what would it look like if you did this? But really starting baby steps on those boundaries. But those boundaries are so, so important to our well-being and our ability to help others around us. Know your peeps, okay? Who out of your posse of friends, family members, who is the person that you can turn to for clarity? And who is the person that you can turn to for calm? Who is the person that inspires you? And who is the person that nurtures you? And who is the person that gives you bold honesty when you need it? Knowing in advance, and even maybe keeping a list of, when you're feeling a certain way that you can just turn to and go, yeah, I think this is the person I want to talk to. Because one thing I find that happens is easy to get sucked into conversations with people that you care about, that mean well, but may not be able to provide you with what you need in that moment. I've also been told that every emotion boils down to love or fear. And I think there's some truth to that. I find that for myself, oftentimes when I'm angry, if I really pick it apart, it boils down to fear. So what do you need? Asking yourself, what do you need in this moment to feel love rather than fear? And it's not solving the problem. I mean, of course, the first answer is going to be, I need this situation to change. Or I need this person to change. Knowing that you can't control all of those elements, what can you control that would help you to feel less fear and more love? What are little things I could do to change my perspective, perhaps? It's the information about fascinating information about the brain. There's one thing called mirror neurons, and there's been studies that have shown that our brain picks up on the way other people are feeling. So if we are hanging around somebody that is also in a very bad space, that's going to most likely intensify our own feelings. But if we're around somebody that is in a more positive headspace, that's also going to positively impact us. So those mirror neurons are really interesting and important. If your Demeter archetype is out of balance, you can look at channeling mother energy into something you love that is just yours, a hobby, a cause. For me, one of the things I'd always wanted to do was play the violin. I played in the 6th grade for about 2 weeks, and then, long story short, I had to stop. And finally, I think it was about 7 years ago, I decided, you know what? I am going to learn how to play violin. And I did. And what was really important for me was not playing for someone else. It's never something I intended to go out there and do open mics, or it was just for me. It was the beauty of the music for me that inspired me. So finding something that you love that is just yours, that you do solely for yourself, is really important. In my book, I also talk about it, some simple tools. It's just an amulet, a Demeter amulet that you can make. And what I personally do for this amulet is I combine citron and onyx, or jet or black tourmaline, amber or red carnelian, lapis, sodalite or turquoise, those crystals. I include some herbs such as rosemary, chamomile, oregano, and then I'll include like a possible symbol of, depending on what you're needing in that moment, courage or unconditional love or strength or communication, or even just a representation of Demeter. Again, just a small piece of wheat or small piece of grass. And I'll carry that around with me in a pouch or a bag. And that I found, usually I'll let it charge on my altar for some period of time, but I have usually found that to be helpful when I needed that physical touch point to connect me with Demeter in a particular moment. So the last thing I want to do is I would like to do a meditation to help you access Demeter's energy. So this actually, when I wrote the book, this actually came to me as a message from Demeter, and I was reading it again this morning, and boy, does it really pertain to our time right now in society, both for us as individuals in healing the mother wound, but also in healing the way that our society views women, views us as mothers. So if you could take a moment to get into a comfortable spot, pay attention to your breathing. Just breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. And I want you to imagine that you're walking down a hallway or an archway filled with trees and just lush, vibrant growth on the earth. You can feel just the lightest breeze. And if you touch the trees surrounding you, you feel just the most loving, calming energy. And as you get to the end of the archway or the tunnel, you find a door in front of you. And this can be any door. It can be a wooden door. It can be a portal, any kind of a door. As you walk through that door, you find yourself in a garden, a lush garden, and the sun is shining down. It's nice and bright, but it's not too hot. It's not blinding you. It's just right. And you feel compelled to sit on a bench. And a woman comes to you. She is glowing. Her hair is the color of wheat. Her eyes sparkle. She's beautiful. She comes to you. She sits down next to you and she begins to speak. This is what she says. Dearest daughter, the time has come for us all to embrace our power as mothers and as manifestations of the divine feminine, for we alone have the power to birth new life into this world. There are some who would try to make us weak, but we are formidable. There are some who would try to make us reliant on them, but we know we can rely on ourselves. Nourish yourself. Rest in the darkness under the light of the moon. Own your power under the light of the sun. Let your voice be heard and let your truth be spoken, for you have the ability to bring the world to its knees, if you so choose, just as I did when I defied the almighty Zeus. For where would we be without our mothers? Who protects their children more fiercely than a mother bear? Just as a mother teaches her children right from wrong, so too must we teach those who would subdue us. We teach with persistence, with patience, with fortitude, with firmness, and yes, always with love. Find your allies, those who would stand with you just as Hecate stood by me. Come together to plant the seeds for a new and bountiful harvest that feeds all, not just a select few. Mother yourselves, just as you have mothered others. As difficult as it may be, sacrifice what stands in the way of your own well-being and soul's growth, just as you have sacrificed for the benefit of others. Look at yourself and be in awe of who and what you are, of how far you have come. Feel your power down to your bones. Recognize the mother spirit within you and the ability to manifest and bring forth new life, be it a child, a business, art, or a new movement. Appreciate your ability to nurture and to provide the conditions that allow yourself and others to prosper and blossom. Just as the sun nurtures the fragrant rose, the vibrant poppies, and the life-sustaining crops, know that I am here. Know that I am with you. I am the lawgiver leading you to justice. I am the Erinyes giving you permission to feel your anger and transform it into fuel and motivation. I am the companion in the dark to hold your torch and share your pain as you walk through the dark valleys of grief and loss. I am the mother, here to guide you through your own cycles of birth, death, and rebirth in your life. I am here to hold you close when you feel lost. I'm here to help you find your way. I'm here to nurture you so that you may bloom. I am here to provide you with unconditional love and acceptance when you need it most. Feel my light strengthen you. Let my arms embrace you. Let my love empower you. Let my story and my presence lead you to find the divine that exists within you. Woman, daughter, mother, goddess. The woman embraces you, and as you stand to leave, you give her an offering, some symbol of your thanks. You turn feeling renewed and refreshed, feeling loved and accepted, and you walk back through the door, back through the tunnel. When you are ready, you return to this space and this time. Take a few deep breaths to center yourself. And return to where you are in this moment. I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed and benefited from this talk today, from this meditation. If you want to find out more about me, you can find me at www.phoenix, AWEN rising.com. I also have a blog and the Agora Pathos. And as I said, my Persephone book can be found anywhere. My Demeter book is coming out in October. And I just hope you have the chance to really work with Demeter, because she truly is one of the most loving and nurturing goddesses that exist. So thank you. Any questions? Do we have any questions? Oh, I'm so glad, Sue. You're welcome. Thank you, Cindy. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. And please, I encourage you to attend the other MoonCon sessions. There are some amazing speakers and amazing topics. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.